All right. Good morning, everybody. We are back. Well, I don't know about beautiful. It's cold and wet. And so good to be here and joining you. We are ready. Dr. Kelly Guidry. I'm going to let these other ladies.
I'm Dr. Brenda Tillman. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. I'm Erica. Dr. Erica.
What do we say about that?
Is Kel there?
So today we are about. Am I freezing?
Yeah. You're freezing a little bit, Kel, and every once in a while the voice drops off. So every time you kind of move your head. So this is technology.
Still.
Yeah.
But today we're talking about the 8 dimensions of wellness. And so I'm going to let Brenda introduce that concept and what it means and how it ties into what our focus is for this month, which is all about upstream resiliency. So.
Well, you guys, I'll tell you, if this last year hasn't shown us that upstream resiliency is probably one of the most important things we do, then I don't know what has. Because I'll tell you what, from isolation to frustration, to challenge, to critical incidents, to weather phenomenons, to politics, to you name it, it's on the plate, right? So let's talk about that for just a second. And you guys remember this. You remember when we were little and mom or dad or anyone used to say to us, you just got a lot on your plate. And we hear that a lot, right? I mean, people just say, well, you've got so much on your plate right now. Maybe you just need to take it easy or do something a little bit differently. You guys, this is no different. We are literally recognizing the fact that that most of us have too much on our plate and we have no plan for how to get that stuff off our plate, right? But let's talk about it from a perspective of trauma. Okay, we use the plate theory, the plate concept, as kind of that understanding of what happens with the prefrontal cortex with trauma, right? And so when we experience trauma, and we've talked about this through our 5 senses, what you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, proprioceptive, things around us, both conscious and subconscious, and I know I'm getting a little deep here, but what happens is we experience this stuff, and then all of a sudden we begin to realize that things are kind of depositing here in this prefrontal cortex on our plate, and it just kind of sits there. And then when things get back to normal, it begins, if it is something that's kind of beyond our coping regular capacity, it starts sending us those messages that says, what are you going to do with this? Tell me what to do with this. And a lot of people will say they experience this through kind of rumination. You know, the event just keeps coming and rolling and I can't get to sleep, or when I close my eyes, I start to think about it, or when I touch something or smell something. And you guys, especially our first responder, military, medical, all of those communities out there know exactly what we're talking about when we say all of you could explain an event from a smell, or could explain an event from a touch or a sound. And so this is what we're talking about today. How in the world do we know how to take all those events that go in, that we experience just on a daily basis, whether it's frustration or anything else? How do we know they get deposited? How do we know how to begin working those off that plate? And oftentimes what you'll hear us say is, work that stuff off that plate so you come to the table with a clean plate when you have to address either the other chronic elements of life or those critical situations that you know in most of your jobs are going to happen. Because when you're a first responder, when you're military, when you're medical, you know those critical incidents are going to happen. So what we're talking about today is kind of finding a way to clear that plate, right? So every time you come to the table, it's like, okay, I've got the room, I've got the buffer, and we've kind of talked a little bit about this, but I've got the buffer to still find joy in life because I found a way to clear that plate, right?
Yeah, that's great. So we're going to start with the idea that this is just a theory. It's a concept, right? There's 8 dimensions of wellness, and we know that there's probably more dimensions of wellness in your life, but these are the ones that are those most tool where if you can take, and I'm going to let Erica talk a little bit about the dimmer switch concept, but you can take and kind of look at all 8 of these and get them into some kind of balance in your life. It helps to do what Brenda was talking about, which is clear that plate. So, all right, Erica, let's hear. I'm ready.
Go into our dimmer switch, and yeah, we love it.
Yeah, this is I mean, it's kind of a it can be considered kind of a boring topic, but I think it's really important because resiliency is all about creating space, as Brenda said, right? And so in order to create space, you have to decrease chronic stress and you have to increase your ability to deal with critical stress, right? If you keep your chronic stress low, you keep your ability to deal with critical stress high, you got a lot of room in the middle for letting your brain think about the things that really matter in life, like what your purpose is, your passion, peace, all of those kinds of things, relationships. And so you have to manage that chronic stress and keep it as low as possible. People don't want to think about it because it's kind of boring and it's work, right? But if you get creative with how you're going to do that, I think it can be a pretty powerful thing in your life. You have that routine that allows you to be spontaneous in the areas in life that matter, right? So how do you manage that routine and keep that chronic stress low is what we're talking about today. So we're talking about that in the form of the 8 dimensions of wellness. And so if you look at those 8 dimensions, you can Google them. They're very well researched. I've actually got it printed out here, the 8 dimensions of wellness. And what they are, what we're talking about is intellectual dimension, meaning are you challenging yourself intellectually, maintaining a professional training, education, whatever it is that you've got in your life that is the intellectual component of your life. Emotional, are you managing your emotional trauma, the emotional things that you've been through? Physical, what is your nutrition habits, your exercise habits, all of those kind of, your sleep habits, extremely important. Social, occupational, financial, environmental, and spiritual. So those are the 8 dimensions of wellness. And here's the thing we talk about is we as humans tend to hyper focus on the ones that we are really good at in life. And so we kind of, and I actually had somebody, a dietitian that I worked with taught me this philosophy of using a dimmer switch instead of an on-off switch. And I love it because what we tend to do is look at the ones that are either most impactful in our lives or the ones that we tend to, our personality tends to gear towards. Like if you're the real social person, you'll get the party in. If you're the real physical person, you'll get the workout in. But you might let finances fall by the wayside and spiritual health fall by the wayside and some of the other things that aren't your natural go-to, right? So then you're 100% into these areas that you're good at and 0% into these areas that are not your natural go-to, right? And then you start to see things like your finances struggling and different things because you haven't been paying attention to them. So then you go to those and you put 100% into those and try to fix them, but you don't have the bandwidth to keep handling the other areas. And so instead of thinking of it as a on-off switch or 100% all in or 100% all out, try to think of it as a dimmer switch, right? Where you set all 8 of these areas in the middle. Right? Instead of 100% into 1 or 2 areas, put all 8 of these areas at about 50%. So that way you've got the bandwidth to adjust when you need to, when life kind of gets in the way and you've got to focus on finances because COVID happened and I got laid off and this is where I'm at in life right now. And so I may have to let off a little bit on these other habits, but once you get that financial area back in line, you can readjust back to the middle in all of those. And so it's a little bit of a different philosophy, but it's an important philosophy to learn. It's balance, right? We talk about balance. You've got to find balance in these 8 areas so that you have the bandwidth to maintain your finances, still stay healthy physically, still maintain relationships socially, all of those kinds of things in a way that's productive in your life.
Yeah.
I love, Kel, I love what Erica's talking about. And you guys recognize the fact that that all of these things are things that cause just that general feeling of, as you look at these 8 characteristics, these are the 8 areas that just cause that kind of ramping up of that chronic stress, right? Whether it's finance, whether it's family, whether it's social, whether it's all of these just cause that ramping up. And all of us are going to go through that, it's high now, it's low now. It's when we begin to look at this and think to ourselves, we might not have this under control, is when you think to yourself, what am I doing to ensure that my finances don't get overwhelming to me? And what you say to yourself is nothing. Okay. I have no plan. I don't do anything to ensure that when I look at my finances, I don't think I can tweak them a little bit. I look at my finances and it scares me to death because I don't know what to do for them. Right.
Yeah.
And so all of that is, when you look at the 8 dimensions, there are so many other, there are other organizations that have broken those dimensions down into 12 and 15. And so for you, you have to look at them and say, where does all this fit? And what you're trying to make sure as you look at these, that this stair step of chronic stress doesn't begin to get to the point where it's so overwhelming because every one of them have no plan, that you just can't get from here to there without getting help to do that. Now, here's the key. Reaching out for help is also a plan, right? Because there are some great investment people. There are some great spiritual people. There are some great therapists. There are all kinds of ways and plans that you can put to get rid of this stuff on your plate. But what Erica's talking about is absolutely, this is the way to look at it. Do I have a plan for this? And if my answer is no, there's a really good chance that these are the things that are going to cause extreme chronic stress. And as we get to the downstream side of, okay, but now we're dealing with the critical stress, do I have the capacity to be able to deal with that? That's what we're looking at. We manage this, we've got this, right?
And I think this to me is where this becomes important, because what we're talking about is habits, right? And there's all sorts of really great resources out there on what habits are. And we have a lot of people. I'm not a huge habit person, although I very much see the importance in it. I have a hard time sticking to it. Some people don't like habits because they want to be more spontaneous in life, right? The problem is if you ignore these 8 areas, they tick up, right? And then your brain is constantly occupied on these things because you've got so much anxiety around the fact that they're not being managed that you can't spend your brain space focusing on the things that you're passionate about in life, right? So the goal is to decrease that so you have more room for what you're passionate in. But the other thing is, if you don't manage these, they go from, just like Brenda said, being, increased chronic stress to becoming critical stress. If you don't manage your relationships, your marriage, it goes from being a not real happy marriage that's really occupying your brain space to a divorce situation, right? If you don't manage your finances, it goes from being, I'm just not paying attention to that, I'm kind of in denial, to, okay, they're foreclosing on my house now. Now we're in a critical situation, right? And so in managing your chronic stress, you're also managing some of those critical stresses in life. But on a small scale, you're creating space for the things you're most passionate about. You have a good morning routine that addresses some of these 8 dimensions of wellness, so that the rest of the day you can focus on the things that inspire you in life, and that you can spend your weekend going out and having fun instead of stressing about your budget and being pissed off at your kids because you're stressed and they're stressed and all that kind of stuff. So yes, it is boring, but you got to have a little bit of boring in order to make room for more fun. And I think that's kind of the point of the 8 dimensions of wellness.
Yeah. I think that applicability piece, right? How do you do this then? Because I think Eric said earlier, people get really focused in on and do really good at the ones that come very natural to them. So, so if I'm a social person, my social wellness is going to be, my dimmer switch on that is going to be super high.
Yeah.
And I tend to be a social person. So for me, social is not something I really need to spend a lot of time focusing on, but I can't lose sight of it at the same time. And so I think that piece, how do you go back and really reflect and say, okay, where are my dimmer switches when it comes to these 8 dimensions? And then what is 1 or 2 things I can do in maybe a dimension that is a little bit lower and needs some attention to adjust it up, and maybe bring down 1 or 2 in a dimension that's super high and is getting a ton of attention. And so I think that that piece is important to talk about. So can we take one and maybe talk that through and what that would look like?
Yes. So what we often recommend in our class is, and it's very much about small habits. If you haven't read the book Atomic Habits, and I'm actually going to write a blog on this that I think will go out tomorrow, right, Kel?
Yes.
So if you want some kind of action steps, that's kind of how I'm planning to gear that blog is towards the action steps of how do you implement this in your life. But it's small habits, right? And that's the dimmer switch philosophy. 100% person, let's take physical for an example, because a lot of times we do this. 100%, an on-off switch would be, oh my God, I'm gaining weight. I'm getting, I don't want to be unhealthy. I'm going to go work out, CrossFit 2 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then on the days I'm off, I'm going to make sure I go for a run. And you can manage that for a month, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I don't have time for this in my life right now. Like, I want to be in really good shape, but everything else is falling by the wayside. So a dimmer switch philosophy would be finding smaller habits that you can make sure you can maintain lifelong, right? And so it would be like a morning workout. Maybe if you really want to get CrossFit and they're doing it 2 to 3 times a week, but getting a morning habit of a walk-in or a yoga session before you go to sleep at night, or things that are there's smaller duration that fit better into the time that you have available in your life. And so there's a whole philosophy out there in the fitness world about low intensity steady state, right? If you keep your low intensity steady state, meaning you get your daily movement in, that's more meaningful to your metabolism in your body than getting those 2-hour CrossFit workouts in, right? And so that's kind of the philosophy, is what is your life on a daily basis, and how you gear your morning routine and your evening routine, and how you move throughout the day to get these small things in that lifelong actually make a much bigger difference, because you're able to maintain them and stick to them throughout your life.
You know what, Eric, I was just thinking about that. For the last 2 days, I've had an overwhelming feeling of, oh my gosh, I've got so much to do. I don't have enough time to do it. And I thought to myself, what in the world, how do I sit down and get myself organized enough to do it? And then I made a list. And this is kind of the concept of what we're talking about. I made a list that said, here's what you've got to do. And now you can assign time to do this. Now you can. And when my brain looked at this list and said, okay, there's nothing else you have to worry about. Just get this list done right now. All of a sudden I said, okay, I've got time to do it. I know it's down here. I can set aside whatever I need. If everything is just rolling and there's no plan, there's no switch, there's no organization to it, the challenge is absolutely sometimes overwhelming. And I will tell you, as a trauma therapist, I think probably 60% of the people who come into my office for therapy come in with the intention of working trauma. And what we find is that it's chronic stress, right? It's that overwhelming feeling of nothing's right. And I don't understand why nothing's right. So therefore it must mean that I got PTSD, or it must mean that I've got trauma, or, so much going on in my life. And it doesn't mean you don't have those things. It doesn't mean, those things can't be addressed. But the key is, if you are looking at these things every single day and saying, where am I with this? How am I dialing this in? What am I doing with this? All of a sudden your brain it literally understands that it can go from chaos to calm, because it doesn't have to worry, right? Yeah. It knows you've got it down, you've got it organized, you check it every morning, your finances. Erica, you talked about a program that you can just go online and tweak your finances, and it's free online every day, or an investor, or, finances. Of course, I keep bringing those up because those are one of the primary things that we see with couples and in families with issues.
Yeah.
Right. Associated with frustration and aggravation. And so, we bring that up specifically, because finances are things that can lead to, I'm going to pick up extra shifts, which takes time away from the family, which all of the things that roll down from that, right? So finances are important.
Yeah, we always talk in our class about, and we always have a picture of the 8 dimensions of wellness up on the screen, and we say, look at them. Which one's creating the most stress in your life right now? Is it financial? Is it intellectual? Are you behind on your professional training? Is it physical? Is your health suffering? Is it financial? Whatever it might be, pick the one that is the most stressful to you and find a 2-minute habit for tomorrow morning and hold yourself accountable to it. Do that 2-minute habit. So if it's financial, download the Mint app and set up your bank on it, and then check that every morning, 2 minutes, go through your budget and just make sure you're on track for the month. It's a monthly budget system and it's phenomenal. It's a great program. If it's relationship, make your spouse a cup of coffee in the morning. Is that going to fix the giant issues that we struggle with in relationships, like infidelity and financial issues and parenting children? It's not going to fix that, but it is going to put you in a place in your relationship where your spouse knows you respect them enough to do that for them, which gets you to a place where you can have a more productive conversation about the harder things, right? And so it's small changes that really lifelong make a giant result in a giant improvement in some of the harder things that we struggle with, some of those critical things, because it creates space in your life. It gets rid of that worry that Brenda talked about that occupies so much of our brain and gets in the way of the things that inspire us. You decrease that worry, you decrease that stress, you increase room for the things that you love in life. And when you increase that room, that in and of itself becomes a buffer to the worry and anxiety that was taking that space, you know? And that's really the goal of good habits in these 8 dimensions of wellness.
And you guys think about this, and I know, Kelly, you want to jump in. You guys think about this in terms of being where your feet are, because the more we worry about, the more we sit in a chair at work or someplace else and worry about our finances back here or up here, rent is due up here, you know, we're not where our feet are. We're not where, and that concept of be in the present, do what you need to do to make the future good, to not rely on the past, do what you need to do, not worry about the past, do what you need to do today, be where your feet are, recognize that, be present, and make plans and organize yourself to the point where all of this other stuff is in a tight little Easter basket and you can say, okay, I know what I'm doing with it. You know, I got it. I got this. And now all of a sudden, all of this stuff starts just rolling off this plate because you've got the capacity to have joy and conversations and all the other things that go along with working stress and trauma off your plate. And then when you have the big ones, there may be something else that needs to be done, but we will get to that when we get to downstream. We'll talk about, you know, the ways that we do that. But that's a huge way for you to begin managing your chronic stress and your life joy. That's what we're all about, right? Enjoy those kids and enjoy what's going on in your life, your family, your friends, whatever it might be.
Yeah, so I just want to, some takeaways, right? I want to make sure that the takeaways from this are with your 8 dimensions of wellness. One of the biggest keys is have a plan. So don't stick your head in the sand, but instead kind of look at these areas and decide, okay, today I'm going to make a plan for each of these areas to start investing in because I know it's going to help create that space. And don't make your plan overwhelming. And I think that's another huge takeaway. So have a plan, but don't make it overwhelming. Make it something that is realistic. We can't say we're going to be the healthiest, most physically fit person tomorrow and that be sustainable. So instead, I'm going to go for a 10-minute walk tomorrow, and I'm going to try to do that every day. I'm going to put it on my calendar, and that's part of my plan. I'm writing it down, and I'm going to put it on my calendar. And so make that a thing where you can identify what it is that you're going to be doing. Hi, Donnie, by the way.
Yes, thanks for coming. We're just glad you're here.
Yeah, and I think the other takeaway, Kel, is that in doing this, the goal is to be able to come to a critical incident with a clear plate, right? And, you know, we talked about this before we got on, but we had a big mass casualty incident here in Fort Worth yesterday with the accident on I-35. And prayers for everyone involved in that, the people involved in the accident themselves, and of course the first responders who responded to the scene of the accident. And that's kind of the purpose of looking at this and investing in it and putting the work into having a plan for these 8 areas, is so that when that does happen, when you do face a critical incident, and it doesn't have to be as severe as that, but of course that's an immediate example that we have. You walk into that with as clear a plate as possible so that you can respond to it the way it needs to be responded to. You can suck it up, as we call it in the first responder world, and do your job, and as a family, do your job to support whoever you need to support that was involved in that accident, and then come out on the other side and find a way to grow as much as you can from having been through that experience. And that's really the goal, right? Is to be able to respond to that and then find growth from it and make meaning of it on the other side. And it's hard to do that if you walk into a critical incident like that with a ton of stuff like finances and relationship issues and health issues and all of that already on your plate, right? And so that's, I think, a really important takeaway as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to challenge those of you who are either joining us live, drop it in now into the comments. But if you're watching this on a later in the day, put down kind of where it is that from those 8 dimensions, which really quickly are intellectual, social, emotional, physical. I'm looking for my, I got to remember them all: environmental, financial, spiritual, and occupational. So if you're looking at those 8 dimensions, and again, we'll drop a link to a website or two that kind of talk through those so you can see them and visualize them a little bit. But we've been posting about them all week also. Decide, okay, what is the one that's creating the most stress? And then tell us which one are you going to tackle? What are you going to make a plan for that's going to help take stuff off of your plate this week? We want to know it because we think it's a really important thing that you start to pay attention to this. It's something that we've seen help lay that foundation for the upstream resiliency, which helps mitigate when the big bad uglies happen in the world.
Yeah. And I will put Kel's freezing a bit. I will put action steps in the blog that will go out tomorrow. So it'll have some of the links to like Atomic Habits that we talked about, some of the websites we talked about, to try to make this an actionable thing versus just a theoretical thing for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. And next week we're going to be here. We're going to be talking about purposeful peering, which is a concept that is super near and dear to our heart, and it's also part of an upstream resiliency plan. And so join us again next week for that. We're excited to be talking about that. We can probably talk about that for a very long time. So
you're right. I think that's where our bread and butter is, especially in our communities of high stress and high threat.
Yes.
Yeah. Any final thoughts, ladies, that you want to add?
No, I'm just glad that Donnie's with us. Ben is with us too. Ben, thanks for joining us. We love it. We're going to have you on here soon. So
yeah, we need to start having some like Donnie and Ben on here to give their responder perspective. They're both firefighters and amazing guys. So eventually you'll get to meet them as well.
I love it.
Awesome.
Right.
Thanks, Kel.
Thanks, ladies. We'll see you guys next week.
Awesome.
Bye, guys. Have a great